Hello and welcome back to the channel. Lord KO here. I know it's been a while since you guys saw this mug, and I apologize for kind of the tardiness of this video. It's taken a little bit for me to kind of get it out, but I think it definitely is worth the wait, right? I wanted to not just review Final Fantasy 7 Intergrade, but kind of express some ideas as far as where I think the remake series is going overall, as well as where Square Enix is kind of going with some of the new projects that they've introduced. We did cover Stranger in Paradise on the channel about 3 weeks ago when the demo dropped. That was actually kind of mixed feelings about it, but it was fun. It was a fun experience overall, right? So we're going to take a look at that. Within this review, we're going to take a look at graphical performance, as well as the story, music, of course, and we're going to take a look at overall structure, right? How do we feel about that? And the most important thing to me coming into this was the battle system, right? When they said that only Yuffie was going to be playable, I had some concerns, but this actually ended up being a beautiful surprise. What they were able to do with the synergy system, I love it. Needless to say, this will have a lot of spoilers for the entirety of Final Fantasy 7 Remake, as well as Intergrade for both sections and stuff like that. So if you have not played them yet, I would highly recommend play them. They are great experiences. But outside of that, guys, as usual, if you are new here, make sure you like, comment, subscribe. I want to actually, if you've played Intergrade, let me know what you think in the comments. What were some things that you liked? What were some things you'd like to see change? Also, if you have a Twitter, feel free to hit me on there. And we did also do a lot of the playthrough on Twitch as well. So if you like live streaming content, stuff like that, give me a shout over there. Without further ado, let's jump right into it. Final Fantasy 7 Remake Intergrade review live now. So like many others coming off of the heels of Final Fantasy 7 Remake, I was left with both the high level of curiosity and anticipation as to what future installments of Final Fantasy 7 Remake may look like. While I think it's safe to say that most of us were concerned with the bit of ambiguity left regarding Final Fantasy 7 Remake's ending, my interest always gleaned much more towards how they would be incorporating new combat systems and seeing the translation of the original cast and settings in today's day and age. With that being said, let's discuss Final Fantasy 7 Remake Intergrade and how I believe this will shape both the future of the Final Fantasy 7 Remake franchise as well as future Final Fantasies. So as I said a moment ago in the intro, I was a pretty huge fan of both the original Final Fantasy VII and the subsequent remake. It's not a stretch to say that I think that this game single-handedly reignited my passion for single-player games, specifically JRPGs. As this is an expansion, we'll break this down into 3 different categories regarding my thoughts, feelings, and speculations regarding the future of Final Fantasy and Final Fantasy VII Intergrade overall. So let's start off with graphics. Man, I thought this game looked insane when it was a 1080p signal being upscaled to 4K on my PS5. Bro, the graphics are so good. I can't get over how good the graphics are. They're incredible. During my initial playthrough a few months ago. In retrospect, this full 4K overhaul makes that previous experience look quite laughable in comparison. Everything from the new lighting effects to the character models of some of the newly introduced cast look consistently fantastic. Gone are some of the very strange low-res textures and models that plagued the game on launch, and even looking up at that big old rotting pizza is an absolute delight. So when it comes to character models overall, I have to give a huge shout out to the character models for Yuffie, Sonon, and Nero. These 3 in particular look absolutely astounding. Now, I've never played Dirge Cerberus a day in my life, but this character's menace felt real to life, and the graphics and effects they used for him was actually truly astounding. Now, the game does offer both the performance and graphics mode, with the option to toggle between each of them, with performance mode giving you a slightly lower resolution but a consistent 60 FPS, which can definitely come in clutch with some of the more insane battles that you have towards the end of the chapters. And then we also have a graphics mode, so this will allow the game to stay locked at 4K resolution consistently, with potential frame drops, with many of the more taxing sequences. Again, it was never really noticeable for me, but you know, your mileage may vary. Now I'm gonna keep it real with you, Chief. The game looks absolutely gorgeous in both modes. And to be honest, there was only maybe one sequence that I played where in graphics mode, there was a noticeable FPS drop and there was a lot of shit on the screen at the same time. So for me, it's kind of expected. I've been gaming for a long time. Even with this new generation, I think it's gonna take a long time for them to really optimize it and get it running, you know, with all these particle effects and all these insane shading and, you know, not even mentoring ray tracing or anything like that. It's gonna take a while for them to get up to snuff. I expect that. So graphics, easily a 10 out of 10. As someone who hasn't really bought any PS5 titles outside of Cold War, which is, you know, hardly a graphical powerhouse, I'm glad that this game served to demonstrate the potential, but maybe just a taste of what the next generation actually has in store for us. So let's talk about the story. The duration of Intergrade is 2 chapters, which is actually pretty decent all things considered regarding what you get for that price. Yuffie takes center stage in this installment of the game, and we get to see many of the events from the original game through her POV as well as explore new areas. Yuffie's main motivation throughout both of these chapters is to infiltrate Shinra and to locate any material that can be used to help Wutai in his struggles. During this soiree, we are shown a different faction of the Avalanche team that we know and love, with newcomers such as Nayo, GJ, Billy Bob, and Nile. Yeah, I know I said Nayo already, but I just think that, never mind that, you wouldn't get it. As well as showing us a very unique perspective regarding our main heroes in Cloud, Tifa, and Barret. Being able to see certain scenarios from a different point of view really does help bring the picture full circle, and I really appreciate that they did that. Another thing that Intergrade does very well is displaying the balancing act and showing us the true cost of the conflict between Shinra and Wutai, and how loss, grief, despair can turn people into extremists via Sonon, whilst through Yuffie's eyes we're constantly reminded how alike people are, and despite their different customs, regions, philosophies, and those that we once demonized, may be closer to us in reality than we ever imagined. It doesn't go too in depth with it, but I like that it allowed the player to think there. While on the surface it may seem like a very straightforward narrative, our other main lead, Sonon, a fellow Wutai operative, and the gradual building of this relationship between him and Yuffie unearths quite a bit of backstory and hidden motivations from each party member, and provides the necessary gravitas to make this quaint yet powerful narrative hit home and make the stakes feel more than real. Now, I do believe this story in particular is much more poignant, so I don't want to delve into spoilers here, but one thing that I will say is, for the love of God, Square Enix, stop putting so much spoilers in your trailers. Knock it off. Seriously, knock it off. There's nothing weirder than making it almost to the end of the entire playthrough, and you're like, hey, that one scene from the trailer still hasn't happened. I wonder what could happen there. And it kind of spoils it for you. Yeah, ran over. In closing, one of the main standouts for this for sure was the pacing of these new chapters. There's barely any fluff, and you can actually miss stuff quite easily, and it gets straight to the point. Now, while I understand why certain fluff elements existed in the original title, it's good to see the developers learn from their mistakes and give us what we came here for. It sets up future installments beautifully, while incorporating elements once considered part of the FF7 extended universe front and center. Yes, Deep Ground is here, and all things considered, I'm intrigued to see their evolution and incorporation into this new universe. Okay, now let's talk about what is easily my favorite part of Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade, the combat system. While Yuffie is our only playable character throughout both chapters, her ability to command and direct Sonon in combat is probably the best I've ever seen in any JRPG combat. He can actually help you. I know that sounds weird to say, but we've all been on the bad side of a poorly programmed or straight up bad AI system, and I'm pleased to say they've absolutely nailed it. Now, I'm a boomer, so I love to complain that there's nothing wrong with the turn-based combat system, but I stand by what I said about FF7 Remake's combat in the original game. They finally got it right. There's enough full autonomy to direct all characters while keeping the pacing of the combat fast and fluid. You never feel like you're out of control. Well, Chief, somehow they've actually managed to take that system and make it even more kick-ass. By incorporating more direct team-based combat via the synergy options and a much more expansive demonstration of what this combat engine is truly capable of, this makes me considerably more hyped for the future. It's like they've incorporated one of my favorite things of all time, Chrono Trigger's tech system, into something much more methodical, yet simultaneously more rewarding when executed properly. This is by far my biggest highlight of the game, and honestly an ingenious way to evolve already one of the strongest aspects of the original title. Combat is easily a 10 out of 10 just for what it potentially holds for the future of this franchise. If they let these ideas just die or fade away into obscurity, I'll be sorely disappointed. We're not going to do a whole section for music, but suffice to say, the soundtrack is absolute bangers from front to back. You've been listening to it through this whole review. Let me know what you think in the comments, but I just gotta say, Nobu Uematsu is back with the vengeance, baby. Every single song is a 10 out of 10, and even just Yuffie's theme remastered is just glorious to hear. So what I want to cap off with is talking about the future of Final Fantasy VII, right? And not just that, but Square Enix, as well as the Final Fantasy franchise. So this all leads us to a very direct question. Where do we go from here? There have been some interviews and quotes published as of late that we should expect a somewhat radically different experience in the next chapter of the Final Fantasy VII remakes. Now, I know that sentence might make people a bit anxious, and rightfully so, given SE's track record. But that being said, I'm going to utter a phrase I never thought would leave my lips. I have faith in Square. Well, when it comes to the Final Fantasy VII Remake and its sequels anyway, they've already demonstrated a higher level of competency and consistency with this title than any other in the last decade. For once, just this once, I wanted to hold off and see what the big picture is and what their vision being executed is before I throw my hands up in frustration. With Final Fantasy XVI already in production and with the release within the next few years, Yes, I said few. You are smoking dust if you think we're going to see that game any earlier between 2023 or 2024. What does this mean for Final Fantasy and SE as a whole? They clearly are game to milk the renewed popularity in Final Fantasy VII to infinity and beyond, with full mobile remakes and a battle royale on the horizon. Does this mean that we're going to be receiving more potential subpar content, or could we be potentially heading into a golden era for SE with some of the titles on the horizon? It really remains to be seen, but I'm cautiously optimistic at this point in time. Now, all of this makes me very curious. They actively seem to be striving for one of the better player experiences than they have in a very long time. Between the graphics, the voice acting, the new storylines, they seem to be firing on all cylinders. Actually, speaking of the new storyline divergence, because I know this will be a topic of contention and people asking what my opinion is on it, I actually think that Maximilian Dude actually summed it up perfectly, and this is actually my thoughts.
So here's the thing. It might not be a red herring, right? I think this is the red herring. Yeah, you know what? Okay, my brain went through it a little bit. Here's my immediate and tender conclusion to the brutal ending of the end of Intermission. I think this is the red herring. The end of the game, Zack arrives at the church, and there's a bunch of people inside the church essentially looking for, like, refuge of some kind, right? But Aerith isn't there. It's implying that Aerith is on the mission with everybody else out doing their thing, so that Zack is actually in the same world as our other characters. Like, the timeline merged where he might have possibly, he could have lived.
I do think that they are going to try and find some type of way to make it so that Aerith maybe doesn't die, and spoiler alert, of course, doesn't die, right? And maybe her and Zack end up together, right? That would be like, oh, everything's good, you know what I mean? That would be fundamentally breaking one of the things that makes Final Fantasy VII so special, is her death, but it's open, right? They've already kind of introduced this new, universe thing, whatever you want to call it, parallel universe. There's clearly something different here. So I'm curious to see where it goes, but overall, I would have to say that Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade is an absolute home run. Everything about this game I loved. The new combat system that they introduced, everything, man. The game looks so good, man. Like, it's actually like jaw-dropping good. I know it could always improve, but it's just really good to see them really taking care and really investing their resources to make sure that their characters are properly represented between voice acting, how they actually appear on screen, everything, man. And I am really hopeful for the future with this particular franchise with Square. Not everything with Square, just this one in particular. And I hope that I'm not going to be clipping this in the future one day and memeing myself because they said something insane. But with all that said, if you have played Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade, let me know what you thought in the comments below. As usual, if you are here for any Final Fantasy content, make sure you like, comment, subscribe. Hit me on Twitter. I will talk to you guys later. LC signing out. Peace.